Hello, everyone, and welcome to the October 7th episode of the LGS Pod, the Soccer Shorts companion podcast, where we highlight topics that affect local grassroots soccer culture here in our hometown of San Diego, as well as across the U.S. and around the world. I'm John Cross, founder of Soccer Shorts, and with me tonight, as always, is our co-host Dylan Wilson. Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I find myself in a small amount of soccer-related disbelief coming off the weekend because I now have to say a sentence I never thought I'd say, which is Cup winners, Hartford Athletic. Hartford Athletic have won a trophy.
They have.
Never
They have
thought
won a
I'd see the
trophy.
day. So it was a dog shit game, but a lot of times in Cup finals, that's how you win, is playing some terrorist football, as the kids are saying these days. So, yeah, hats off to Hartford. Good to see former loyal Ant Siaha get the start and win in a Cup final.
That's right. Yes, and Hartford, I think, started off very poorly this season, and they have impressed as the season has gone on. So they this might give them a little boost coming into the playoffs and help
True.
them make a little bit of a run. And as we've talked about multiple times, I really like the idea of this USL Cup.
Yes.
This idea of playing a couple divisions together, and frankly, it's the only league right now that can do it because it has multiple divisions under its umbrella. And it's kind of a tease of getting us closer to the idea of promotion relegation. But this idea that I really hope they continue even when they have a Division One league. I've listened to some other podcasts in the last week and other people talking and wondering, well, what's going to happen once they have a Division One league? Is that going to be too big of a gap between Division One and Division Three? And so what? I think
so
it's
what?
great that there is a place for teams. I mean, Greenville made it to the semifinals, and you have two teams here. Now, Sacramento also started slow and has really come on as the season has progressed. But two teams that aren't, sitting at the top of the table, but got a chance through this tournament play to get a trophy, and always good to have a trophy. I hope USL gets to one day to do a balanced kind of schedule, however they do it, so there can be a supporter shield type winner, a league champion along with a season-long cup champion. And if you're going to do a postseason tournament as well, that kind of champion. I think the more opportunities you give to teams, the better.
Yeah. I only have two things really that I would like to see them add or change, or however you want to say it, to this cup going forward. And we talked about how the group stage was a little chaotic, but I think that will kind of naturally sort itself out as more teams begin to populate the leagues, especially if we really do start to see a three-tiered structure with movement between them. Like obviously there's going to be a lot more clubs competing than there are now, which could really facilitate better group kind of structure. So I think that'll kind of sort itself out. But one thing I'd really like to see is them add a reward to the tournament win other than just winning the trophy. I mean, like, winning the trophy is great, but like and just using England as an example, Crystal Palace won the English League Cup, or the FA Cup rather. But the point stands, that gives them a berth into the Europa League, which, granted, the U.S. Open Cup does, but the EFL Cup also, the winner is granted the Conference League, I think, or the Europa League, something like that. And so I think it would be nice if they could find a way to add that. Maybe if, you win the cup, but you don't make the playoffs, like, you're guaranteed a playoff wildcard spot, or like something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I think that would be neat to experiment with. So that's really my one idea going forward. But the other thing I wanted to say, and the reason I really think this cup will be successful if they persist with it, and one of the big reasons I think they should, is it's kind of penetrates with like people I'm going to refer to as normies, but I mean that in like a loving way. And by that, I mean like people who are normal and like have normal lives and aren't like awash in all this soccer wars drama and nonsense and
Right.
information all the time. It's kind of like it's similar to politics, right? It's like it's good to check in with like, previous generations might have called them ill-informed or uninformed voters, but like the normies, people who for whom this isn't their whole life, right? Like, what are they feeling, thinking, seeing? That's a good litmus test for what the general population is feeling, right? And I think the same is true here. The normie soccer fans, the ones who just want to root for a soccer team, enjoy the game, whenever anybody I've talked to about this tournament who either knew what it was or didn't, and once I explained it to them, everybody thinks it's an awesome idea. They love that they're doing it, and they were inclined to check it out. And I think that kind of, like I said, that penetration to, like, again, I mean this in a loving way, the normies is a good sign that this is a good idea that people do want to see.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've had similar reactions, when you describe this tournament, and it's for, as you phrased it, the normies. It's novel. We don't see these kinds of tournaments in U.S. leagues of different divisions and tiers playing, teams from different tiers playing against each other. I like that, and I also like what you mentioned about being something at the end that
Mm-hmm.
a team can be a part of. I think it'll be really interesting because at the moment, we did our CONCACAF Champions League last week, and we looked at how do you qualify for the CONCACAF
Mm-hmm.
Champions League. And outside of MLS, your only option, as you mentioned, is the Open Cup, but that's because MLS on the men's side is the only Division One designated league. Once USL, assuming they will get granted at some point Division One status, it's going to be interesting what the politics are for how those berths to the CONCACAF Champions League get redistributed and reallocated now that you have another Division One league, and potentially, like you said, using the Europe equivalent of Europa League or Conference League for the winners. We don't really have that at the moment in CONCACAF. Maybe there will be in the future. But if you've got first division teams playing in the USL Cup, I mean, I guess the USL could decide if they get two berths, they could do one berth to the USL Cup champion and something else with their Division One league, however they want to do it.
Yeah,
Shield
that's
winners, or
that's a good point. I hadn't even considered that.
but it'll be interesting to see the politics behind how that shapes out. And first, USL has to qualify as a
Sure.
Division
Yes.
One league. They have to give the right teams, right? That's still at least a couple years down the road if it happens that fast. But it'll be interesting. Also, in this whole conversation, not really what we planned about or planned to talk about tonight, but I have been thinking a little bit about how the PLS changes over time, because if USL can demonstrate stability within their clubs, even with promotion relegation, that might put pressure to change some of the PLS standards because they were put in there in the first place to try to help stabilize the leagues. And we're going to talk about NISA a little bit later in the program here, but this idea of helping set a structure to stabilize leagues. And I know we complain about the PLS all the time for a variety of reasons, but really the underlying intent is to help provide some stability. So it'll be interesting to see if some of those numbers changes. Do you really need a 15,000 seat stadium? Do you really need to be in a large marketplace of more than 1 million residents, right? So I would imagine those couple of things like that will be up for discussion. Don't know about net worth of owners, but there will be some things I'm sure will be discussed over the next few years.
Yeah, I don't know. I've seen people speculate that the fact that USL appears to be moving forward with this D1 league means either they have a bunch of teams ready to vamp up their stadiums, which, to be fair, we have been seeing recently, or probably realistically a mix of both, they are expecting that the U.S. Soccer Federation will give them some sort of leniency on the PLS, which, like I said, I kind of wonder if it'll end up being kind of both. We'll see.
And I don't know if you heard it, but one of the owners of, I believe it was the Columbus Crew, made, I don't want to say an offhanded comment, but when someone asked, it was a wide ranging interview. Basically, he'd complain like MLS needs to do some things better if they're going to be successful. I don't know if it was the Crew or Cincinnati now, but anyway, if MLS to be more successful, again using business terms in the marketplace. But someone asked, does that include pro rel? And the answer was something to the effect of, maybe, we'll have to see, which was interesting. An MLS owner actually just even the maybe version. Now that's one owner, right, out of all the group, and the board of governors would have to vote. But I would imagine that there are other owners. I would doubt a majority, but there are other owners that would be open to the idea of a unified pyramid.
I do, and I've said this for a long time. I think what would really be the best for U.S. soccer as a whole would be like an ABA NBA type merger, wherein rather than only taking 4 ABA teams and putting them in the NBA and the rest folding, you take whichever teams are ready for the top flight, put them in the top flight and take the rest of the USL teams and use that to help build out the lower parts of the pyramid, right? I think that kind of makes a lot of sense in my head, and I understand that, like, logistically, it would be a lot more complex than that. But that is one of the reasons I say that. And to your kind of point, using even just like the business hat here, the thing that sets soccer apart from the other big American sports is that it is so global, right? And so I think what they, and by they, I mean the owners of MLS clubs, will be looking at is they will look at the MLB, which has been struggling not only really with domestic audience or international audiences, but also domestic audiences. Though I do think they've instituted some changes that have actually helped, but that's a whole other conversation. But I think they'd even more so be looking at the NFL, which I think for a long time is a model that Don Garber has looked to emulate, right? The way that the NFL functions as a monopoly and does it making money hand over fist. But what I think they'll see is the way that the NFL has recognized they have maxed out what they can squeeze out of U.S. audiences, and that if they want to keep expanding monetarily, they have to go abroad. They're playing games not just in London now. They had a Sao Paulo game this year. They've had Mexico City for a couple of years. I'm willing to bet in the next 5 years they will have a game somewhere in Africa. And granted, I know people hate when white people treat Africa as if it's a country. I acknowledge Africa is not a country, but like having an NFL game on the continent of Africa would be undeniably like landmark, I think, for like the game and just American imperialism and like a whole lot of different kind of angles you could take on that. But what I'm trying to say is the MLS owners will look at the other major American sports and see that they have decided they need to turn their eyes to the world to continue to make the growth they want. And in soccer, they can't do that. They can't continue to expand outside of the US. They need to expand in the US. So they actually have almost an inverse problem to what the NFL has, where the NFL feels like they've maxed out their US audience. The MLS, I think a savvy owner would look at the landscape and say, we need to do something different because we don't have that option to try and like outsource our fandom and income. So we need to be different to other American sports at home. And I think the obvious answer when you take that business-driven perspective, I would argue that's a profit-driven perspective right there. I think the logical answer is to try something very different, like promotion and relegation, because that is established. You don't have to come up with all the ideas, Right. So anyway, long-winded way of saying I actually think in the long term it will make financial sense for MLS to do that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I agree, and we'll see how things shift, and maybe it's going to take the USL displaying how pro rel could work in the US, assuming it does, right?
Hmm.
But maybe it'll take that to start opening up some of those conversations down the way. It'll be interesting, however it plays out, to see how things play out, especially in the wake of the way world football is going. So I think that's a good time for us to transition maybe to some current events, but I probably should announce, like we try to do here at the beginning, the main topic of our show is we're going to do a deep dive again on San Diego soccer history and look at the time period from about 1913 to about 1920, and from where we left off on part two. So we'll do a brief little recap, and then we'll get into that part. That'll be our main topic. But as we always do ahead of time, we'll do some lower league and cup and pro rel and some current event news. So to tie into exactly what you were saying, Dylan, a second ago about NFL going abroad to try to maximize games, did you see that UEFA finally made the decision to grant two one-off games that all their press releases is like, this is not precedent setting, this, or they're basically one-off things.
They hit
And
us with
from
the hanging Chad special.
yeah, and then what I read through the other documents is they're looking to try to change and strengthen their rules. And I think, like most major soccer writers around the world have already stated, yeah, you've let the horse out of the barn here. Like, there's no going back. If you want to change your rules, you should have changed your rules before this and said no, because there has been a legal precedent where you won in a court case to protect domestic leagues, but this was, I don't know, I want to say like 30 years ago now. But I think it was around the time of the Bosman ruling, if I remember correctly. It's the only time it's ever gone to court. And I know people keep saying, yeah, but with UEFA, fair trade policies and things which I'm not an expert on, but the idea is that they would possibly lose this time around in court. Like, okay, but you have the chance to change your rules. You already won a court case previously. This is the complying in advance that I hate. Like, unless you want to do it and you're just pretending,
Well,
for
it's
some
that
kind of
second-
cover.
It's that second.
Sure.
It's and here's the thing, and like again, I made the joke about the 2000 Supreme Court case, but I think it's a good comparison because they use the exact same language. This is not meant to be used as precedent, but it's an even more glaring, ridiculous thing to say in that instance, just because that's like stare decisis is literally the whole basis of like a legal system. But anyway, whatever. The thing about saying something doesn't set a precedent is that is not how precedent works.
Right.
Like precedent very literally is just what has happened prior. So by doing it, it doesn't fucking matter what caveats they add. This is the precedent. And I really think that it's not going to set a precedent excuse is just like a very cynical way for them to like hand wave and say like, well, we tried, when this all comes crashing down in a few years and all of a sudden all the Premier League games are being played in the US for whatever. I say for whatever reason. We know exactly what reason.
Well, and frankly, I don't know that the U.S. is, I mean, it has been, but I don't know that it's going to be the future market. I think the Middle East is going to be the future market. That's
true.
where the money is going to be.
Riyadh, baby.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't know how I want to phrase this. We focus on grassroots soccer and try to look at more community aspect of the game and connecting with the community. I'm always saying that here on this podcast. And I don't know how this is going to play out on the upper end big business side of soccer, but I have already heard of people saying like, I'm done with the Premier League. I'm done with these leagues. I want to find and go back to what I remember kind of as a kid. I want to go back and find a lower league team or go back and connect with my local team. And it's going to be interesting to me to see if this drives, some fans somewhere else away from the top teams, but also This is a perfect opportunity for people that if you do not like this, if you're a supporter of one of these teams that's going to go play in one of these games and you think this is bad, don't support it. Call your club. As supporters, organize and don't go to one or two of your home matches and protest. I mean, they're only going to do it if they think they can make money. And if they know there's going to be backlash, they won't go do it if they're going to lose their fans. Or maybe they will, and they're going to lose their fans, and it's not going to be the same thing. I mean, it's going to turn into what I think our Super Bowl is in American football, which is a pop culture party that has a football game that's played in it, but so much stuff has been built up around the Super Bowl. Tickets are ridiculously expensive. You know, it's not like the two teams that make it, a whole bunch of their fans can go in. It's not like I remember someone from my family saying they went to, I don't know if it was Super Bowl III, but it was in Miami, whichever one of the early ones, and walked up day of the game, bought tickets to go watch it because it wasn't even sold out. You know, you're never going to have that again. So it's like we as supporters and fans, you know, we have a choice that we need to make as well. And frankly, we really control how this plays out. If you want to stay organized and you want to, you know, make your voice heard, you can. It's there. Or I guess as some people will just complain but accept it and move on. But the opportunity is there to organize and make your thoughts known here. So I'm going to be very interested to see how this plays out and how supporters specifically react to this news.
I mean, unfortunately, I think it's more likely that they go through with it. They make a bunch of money. They keep doing it. They keep making a bunch of money. Some fans do get mad and do something about it. But in the end, you know, if they're making money, do they really care? And and like, I hate to say it, and this is, you know, me being cynical, but I just don't have a lot of faith in, like, soccer fans, especially, is one of the most, like, toxic subcultures I've ever waded into. And, like, I just don't have a lot of faith in, like, organized fan movements, if I'm being completely honest, unfortunately.
Well, we'll see how that goes, because in terms of, I guess, fan movements and ticket prices, we ought to talk quickly about the World Cup ticket prices, which were released
Yes.
ridiculously expensive just off the bat, and then even more so on the resale market. And FIFA announced their own, like, guaranteed resale section where, you know, to make sure you're not getting scammed by anybody, but they're taking 15% of the ticket price each direction. So they're making a ton of money. The dynamic pricing, all this stuff. I had one of my relatives, unbeknownst to me, participate in to get in on the first round, and they got selected. So they contacted me and say, "Hey, I got it. Do you want to get tickets?" Like, yeah, they were thinking of me when they did it, and they thought they just do it and see what happened. And I had to politely thank them, but turn them down and say, "Yeah, I'm not going."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so two things. I have, I think that it's kind of funny because, like, I think realistically, those of us who have, like, been paying attention both to American soccer but American sports, like, more at large, completely saw this coming. Like, this was exactly what I expected. These are what I would argue are, like, pretty normal American prices for a sporting event, and not even like the World Cup level sporting event, like average regular season sporting event prices for the most part. So, like, I'm not surprised, I guess. Um, but yeah, it's truly an American World Cup in that way. I was going to say, this has just kind of been the case my whole life. I remember when I was, I don't know, maybe in high school, and the Giants went to the World Series in 2010. I had a friend call me, like, the day that they won the pennant. like, oh, do you want to go to game 2? Like, my dad can get tickets. And it was like, already then, it was like $500, and that was in 2010, which obviously I wasn't
Yeah.
able to. I was in 10th grade. But, like, that was 15 years ago. And so it's kind of, maybe I'm able to laugh about it because I just, like, I've never known tickets to, like, be cheaper than that, really. But, yeah, I don't know. I guess I was a little surprised how surprised a lot of people seem to be.
Well, they're a huge increase even just from the last World Cup.
Well,
But,
yeah,
you
totally.
know,
But, like, again, like, that's just America. We charge more for this.
yeah, we do. I still think they're
No,
outrageously
they are. I'm not
expensive.
defending them. I guess I'm just like, I'm not surprised, I guess is really all I'm trying to say.
Right. Not surprised, but disappointed that the World Cup clearly has crossed over to that point of becoming like the Super Bowl is, that it's a pop culture event and more wealthy people are going to want to attend because they've seen other matches before and they want to be a part of it. So people with the means will be able to go there. Some people who don't have the means will, sacrifice a lot to make sure they're able to get there. But where everything is at this moment, where our country is, where FIFA is, it's just not something I can really support. Even if someone gave me free tickets, I mean, no one has, so I don't know. Maybe when presented the opportunity in front of me, maybe I'll cave. But right now, I can't see myself going to a single match, even if I had free tickets.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I remember when the World Cup was announced to be in the United States, and I was very excited, thinking like I will definitely be going to a game of this. And now
Right.
I just don't even think I'm going to bother. So I don't know. It's yeah, it's too bad, but I don't know. I guess maybe this is kind of the way soccer's been going. Especially, I think if you look at the amount of clubs in like the top European leagues over the last 10 years that have been bought by like American business people and or like private equity,
Right.
like it has been going this way longer than I think a lot of people realize.
Right. And again, we'll see. I'm afraid they're gonna. I don't think it'll happen around the world, but I'm afraid some of these big owners, these private equity groups, are going to drive certain clubs into the ground.
It's what they do. They're
Yeah.
literally bloodsuckers. They take the value out of things, transfer it into like the hands of a few in terms of value, and then sell the scraps for parts.
Right. Right. All right. Well, let's. I think we've beaten that
Anyway,
one quite a
yeah,
bit. Let's
yeah.
let's go ahead and move on. Not necessary. Well, actually, I did have a piece of current event news that is two quick things that little on the happier side. I did not get to watch any of the matches today, but the Women's Champions League, UEFA Champions
Oh,
League,
nice.
had matches today, and they're on CBS Sports. And so if you have Paramount Plus subscription and stuff, they're there. So there's some decent coverage happening in the U.S., which is nice to see. Additional coverage and better coverage, and not like hunting around to try to find a stream somewhere. So that was one piece of good news. So that should be for the whole campaign here. We should be able to see matches through Paramount
Nice.
Plus. So CBS Sports, Paramount Plus, really, really making an effort on the soccer side in this country. So I'm personally happy to see that. But also, I saw an article in the BBC between our last show and this show. So I was probably towards the end of last week, and it was about a company that has designed these special goggles for people who are visually impaired, and it was a certain type of impairment. So they're people who are legally blind. They're basically extremely nearsighted, and as things further and further away, even glasses just don't help. It's just blurry. But these special kind of goggles allow them to see much better at distance because of somehow basically taking what it sounded like more of a video image and then reprojecting it closer. But it allows fans in the stands who have some visual impairment needs to be able to enjoy a live match, which they couldn't really do before because
Very cool.
it was all, it's just blurs out there.
Right.
So it allows them to be able to watch it and capture it a different way. So I thought that was cool. Cool
Very
story.
Cool. Yeah, definitely.
Something. So let's turn our attention to the US and look at some of our lower league news and cup news and so forth. We already did a big deal on the USL Cup. So let's turn our attention briefly here to NISA and the NISA Pro Cup, which starts on Monday, October 13th. So this is NISA's attempt to kind of restart. They didn't have a league season this last year for 2025. They weren't sanctioned by US Soccer. So they've started up their, I don't know if it's always been called the Pro Cup. I feel like it was called something else before, but this fall tournament. And so it's starting, and I have mixed feelings about NISA's campaign kind of getting started. On the one hand, super happy to see kind of an effort by the league office to get the word out there. But my goodness, they seem like they just can't stop stepping on their own toes. And one of the things I saw today, they're doing this countdown to the cup. And they started today with the 7 facts about NISA. I don't know if you saw this. So the first fact was released today, and their fact that they're promoting is that 24 clubs have played in the league since 2019. I'm not sure that's the fact that you really want to emphasize.
How many are left?
Because you've never had more than, I think, 11 in a season.
Yikes. Yeah.
You've had huge turnovers between seasons where you're pulling in new teams, and you didn't play this year. So you're talking about from 2019 to 2024, you've had 24 different clubs participate. I don't think that's the win you think it is.
Yeah, for real.
So I don't know how many teams they're expecting to try to start with. I think you only need 8 for Division 3 to start a Division 3 league. So, yeah, that's not really. I don't know what they'll do the rest of the week, but not super great. And then they also highlighted a goal by a player who I think that player. I don't know if they've moved to another team or not, but that player was playing for the Maryland Bobcats, which is a team they kicked out of the league in their very last season. The winningest team in the league right before playoffs, they kicked them out. I don't know what the whole story is from the Maryland Bobcats side, but from NISA's side, I remember it was because they violated league rules and USSF rules or something, something with sanction. It was something along those lines, but basically they played the whole season, but right before playoffs, they basically kicked them out, which I know that didn't sit well with lots of people.
I'm sure that went over great.
So I don't know really more about that story than anything, but it also doesn't help the credibility of your league. If you have a team that hasn't been meeting the things, and why'd you let them play out the season and then stop before postseason? Like, it just, there's weird things in there, but they used a clip from that team and a certain player scoring as promotion, which of course set a segment of the social media sphere ablaze, with that. So just not super smart things, but they did right before they started doing this, they did announce, they confirmed a new team called Peak 11 FC, which I kind of like that name. They're from Boulder, Colorado. So
yeah.
Peak 11. But they have been confirmed for the NISA Pro Cup, and I imagine that's in response to this news. And this is something I know I sent to you, Dylan, in between our shows. But just up the road from us in Temecula, which technically Riverside County, but I remember coaching and I remember in youth soccer and all kinds of stuff, Temecula teams would frequently come down and play within the San Diego circuit stuff
Right.
rather than play in Riverside. So they're almost like an de facto San Diego County a little bit there, especially in terms of supports. But Temecula FC, which has been around more than a decade now, I believe, have played in the MPSL, were involved with NISA, were supposed to be part of the Pro Cup, but announced just the last few days that they are pursuing a entry into USL League One. So what are
Yeah,
your thoughts about that?
I did see that. I mean, I think that's cool. I know they have a very passionate fan base and an owner who I think maybe rubs some people the wrong way, but is like very, very committed to the team. So I think that's a big get for USL. I think Temecula are more in the mold of Detroit City than I think maybe Detroit City fans would like to admit. Um, that came as a surprise to me, and I think it signals something about the seriousness with which USL is approaching this pro rel idea. Because I don't think a team like Temecula joins in if that isn't really, genuinely on the cards.
Right. They have stayed away intentionally.
Yes.
They have stayed invested in NISA because of the independence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think same thing with Chattanooga FC. And as you
Yes.
mentioned, Detroit City. Yes, I think people want to do that ideally, but there also comes a time in your growth where you have to make a decision,
Mm-hmm.
especially if the independent side is a little crazy, because this is going to tie into something we're going to talk about in a second, but NISA always feels like they're scrambling to pull in teams to make a league. And maybe clubs that aren't quite ready to make the jump to Division 3 soccer in the United States, which really, that's professional soccer as opposed to semi-professional, pre-professional, amateur, whatever you want to call it before. And that's a big jump. I would say it's a bigger jump than going Division 3 to Division 2, like League 1 to Championship and the USL, because you weren't a professional team before. You may had aspirations to be one, but to make that jump is really big. I know Temecula has wanted to make that jump. They've wanted to stay independent. In fact, my first kind of foray into our local lower league scene was with the North County Battalion, which I got a scarf up here. Which side? The side up here, about right there. But they were in the MPSL, and the owner of the NC Battalion, I don't know if he had seen a game in Temecula or what, but he got together with the ownership group of Temecula FC and really found out how to go about getting a team. They were very helpful to getting the North County Battalion started in the NPSL at that time. And that was about 10 years ago now as well. So, yeah, they've been around a while. And if USL does the things that they keep talking about doing, I'm excited about this move. I'm excited that, they're just 30 minutes up the road from me, probably not even quite 30 minutes. But they're close by, and we start looking at Southern California and the announcement with Riverside, and we already have, even though they're championship club, but Orange County, but you start seeing the bigger footprint happening of USL in this Southern California and Southwest region. It's exciting for what the regional soccer could look like in just a couple of years.
Yeah, definitely. And, like I've talked about, I feel like Southern California would be a really good place to kind of test the waters for ridding the league of territory rights, because there's absolutely enough people and enough interest and enough players here in this region to do that. So I know, obviously it's more complex than that. But yeah, it is really exciting. We talked about Riverside being a really cool ad, I think, last week. And I, just I'm glad they're building out at the lower levels, because I think for a long time there, the expansion in the USL, a lot of teams would come in at the championship level, and it just seemed like they weren't really ready for it. So I think pushing clubs towards expanding into USL League One is a really good idea. I think that's something they've been needing to do for a long time. But finally, you talked about the instability of NISA, and that being part of the reason like why clubs leave, and that's true. I think part of the instability comes from their commitment to trying to have this pro league when they don't really have the infrastructure for it. And really, I mean, I know like beating a dead horse at this point, but it really is just a shame that there isn't some more unified pyramid shaped, what have you, organized structure, because NISA, I think, could fill a really crucial role in that structure if the clubs that joined it actually had room to grow rather than just
Right.
exist in this floundering league or not be professional.
Right. And I think NISA Nation really kind of helped lay a little bit of a path of how the pre-professional landscape could look. Unfortunately, I mean, the whole idea with NISA is NASL was supposed to sit at the top of their pyramid, and NISA was going to be below it, and then you had the NISA Nation. We all know what happened with the NASL, or at least the second version of the NASL. And then, that it's too bad the NISA Nation piece didn't really, that wasn't where the emphasis was, or the concentration of effort. Because I think if it was there, that really would have helped grow kind of that pre-professional tier to build up to what might be an entry level into a third tier, or Division 3, I guess, of American soccer.
Yeah, I truthfully haven't checked in on it in a couple of years, so I say this with probably some out of date information. But there was a time where I really looked at what NISA Nation was doing and thought that's the best work anybody's doing in terms of like organizing what you need to have in order to have like a unified pyramid, because you really do have to build from the ground up. And I think that's part of, as we've talked about, what American sports and soccer get wrong is that's the unsexy part, building from the ground up. Like we want the best right away. And so that kind of, it's those competing kind of ideas. But I really love what NISA Nation was doing, just taking the existing leagues and giving them a structure to like be all tied together. So I hope that they can find a way to not lose that while chasing this dream of a pro league as well.
Yeah, we'll see how things play out, certainly. Let's get back to some USL news a little bit, because it's not all rosy in USL land, as we talked about last week with the Players Association, but also Santa Barbara Sky FC announced that they are delaying their launch until 2027 at the earliest. It was going to be next year, but no one really thought that was actually going to happen because they weren't part of that group of 7 that they kept talking about to be around for next year. But actually, now that I think about it, I think Santa Barbara Sky FC were going to be Division 1 or League
originally
1
when they announced, but then
and then I think they switched to Championship,
which was a bad decision, because that's not and like I understand that what I'm about to say is like not a pro rel thought, but like as it stands in the current U.S. soccer system, that is not a USL Championship city. Like I love Santa Barbara, but it is a USL League 1 city at best.
Yeah, and I have mixed feelings on this. And I, again, have heard some other people comment on this over the week. And I think a lot of people have the feeling that this is a bad look for the league when you have a team that's there and they're keep delaying. And I'm not so sure that that's really the case, because the opposite end is what we just talked about with NISA, who's just always seeming to cobble together just enough teams to meet the requirement, and people aren't really ready. And I would rather see this. And I think the only reason that, and again, maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but I don't really know what's going on there on the ground in Santa Barbara, but I'm going to say that I would rather see Santa Barbara Sky FC take the extra time, and I think they can, because what they see is a stable structure in front of them in the USL, depending where they land, League One or Championship, that it's better for them to not jump in and maybe struggle and maybe take another year to get their ducks in a row, whatever it is that they need to do in order to bring their team or teams, because I thought they were supposed to have a women's team as well.
I think so, yes.
So, but to get everything in line to make sure that they can launch properly. And I think, you know, I was not aware of this until very recently, but we just had this new team announced, right, in Boise, the AC Boise. And I saw an interview with the owner, I think it was on Morning Kick Around, and he talked about that this was 10 years in the making. Like, they've had the rights, it just flew under the radar mostly, but this was 10 years in the making to find the right people and get the group, but they have been planning and working on this for a while. So especially in that light, when I hear this news about Santa Barbara Sky, like, okay, take a year. Like, doesn't seem like the league or anything's going anywhere. It doesn't sound like we're going to lose any teams for possibly the second year in a row, I think, for USL on the men's side. So if we're starting to get that stability and keep adding teams to a more stable structure, then yeah, I think the Santa Barbara Sky should take what time they need to come into the league and do it properly and successfully, rather than rush. And I say that even knowing, being a fan of the Loyal. Can you imagine, or can you believe, with the San Diego Loyal, it was not even 1 year to put all that stuff together.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. I remember being in a meeting with Warren Smith in April of 2019. Steve Brokoff, through Ricardo, had invited a few people, and it was our first introduction to Warren. And just, it was some conversation like, hey, I want to bring a team here. It was right on the heels of the Soccer City stuff losing. That was in April. They announced the team by June. By September, they announced they're playing in 2020, and they put a team and they went forward to rousing success, I would say, overall. So it can be done faster, but I think good to see. I think some teams may be taking their time to make sure they really do have everything in place, because what undid ultimately the Loyal was lack of a place to play. Now that was hurt by SDFC coming in and going to Snapdragon when that's where the Loyal was headed. But once that happened, that kind of killed the chances for the SD Loyal. But we'll see. We'll see how that plays out there on the men's side. Another quick USL news. Another good thing to hear: Vermont Green started a women's team last year, and they played some exhibition matches, and they announced that they're going to be a new USLW team in a new division, Northeast Division, that they're trying to start. They're now the third team that's committed to this Northeast Division, so they need 2 more teams to commit to actually have it go, because they need a minimum of 5 teams per USL to get that new, regional league going, or division going. So I'm curious whether this announcement is to try to help push another group to get ready to be in there, another local group, or if it's like, yeah, we already have the 5 teams. We're just parsing out our announcements, and maybe we'll get lucky and get more than 5.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't realize. I guess that makes sense. You need a few teams to start a new division, and the USLW is pretty localized as far as I'm aware. But yeah, I mean, that would be great. I think New England, especially, like much like Southern California, like has the density of interest and players like to support, a lot of teams. So I that's great. I appreciate them trying to take on the mantle and move some other teams in the right direction. I'd love to see if they haven't already, Hearts of Pine, get a women's team going. Maybe they can get in on that.
Yeah, that would be. I don't know what their plans are, but that would be nice on that end as well. I agree. All right, I think there's, in the interest of time, we're going to cut a couple things out that we were going to talk about, but let's get to the U.S. Open Cup first. Quickly, did you watch the final? Any thoughts on the final?
I tuned in when I saw your text about CJ Fodry coming on the field, and unfortunately, in about 25 minutes I watched, I got to see about maybe 5 minutes of actual soccer. So,
yeah, it was not the prettiest of games.
No,
there.
Not even a little bit. But like we said, Cup finals, that's kind of, they do tend to go that way.
It's Cup finals. Good to see it sold out. It was a good crowd.
Absolutely.
I was really hoping CJ.
Lots of cuts to Matthew McConaughey wearing his hat that just said "All right," which, to be fair, that was pretty funny.
Yeah. I was really hoping that local product CJ Fodry could have a bigger impact in them. I got excited when he got in. That was pretty much the only reason I was really watching it, but haven't seen too much MLS play this season of games. And, it's one game. It's not representative, I know, of everything else in the league, but it was a hard game to watch as a neutral. It really was not terribly entertaining. But
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, go ahead. But just in terms,
I was just going to say, I agree. I don't actually think that's indicative of the style of MLS play writ large. It's actually been kind of interesting because I've seen a lot of talk in my Spurs circles about how Son seems to be in Ballon d'Or form again now that he's in LA. But I think a lot of people are pointing out that it's because the Premier League has moved in this very stodgy, get stuck in 4-4 fac and 2 kind of direction. Whereas the MLS is very much in that ebb of high possession, high line, high technical play, where Son totally thrives getting all that space to run in behind. I said, I think it's really more that it was a cup final. And I think you're right. It's not particularly indicative of what the average MLS game might look like this year.
Yeah. And really what I wanted to get to was about the 2026 US Open Cup qualifying. Now that we're fully committed here moving forward for 2026 US Open Cup, the qualifying tournament is going on. Round 2 is this weekend. We have 4 San Diego teams in play. We have plans still, right, to go to a match on Sunday. We're going to hit the 4:30 match between FC Balboa and San Diego Inter. Is that correct?
Yes, I am in at 4:30.
4:30. I've reached out to some other people. We'll see if I can get
I've got a
bit of a group.
I think Puma said he was one person. I think so.
Yeah, good. Okay, so I got a couple. Like I said, I've reached out to. We'll see if we can get a few people. That is going to be the one we're going to see. Is the 4:30 match against FC Balboa and SD Inter, and it's going to be at the Logan Memorial Education Campus. So we'll see whoever wants to show up out there, and we'll make some noise. There is a second match, though, on Sunday, also at 6 p.m. It's City SC versus Rebels SC, and that's going to be at Aviara Community Park up in Carlsbad. But those games are both this weekend. As we've speculated before, our guess is probably the winners of these matches will play each other in round 3. So we'll have another opportunity for a match in November. I think there's going to be two rounds in November, if I remember correctly. But we'll have a round 3 and then eventually a round 4. So very likely the San Diego winner of these 4 teams total is going to face someone else from Southern California for that spot in the US Open Cup proper. So if you're interested in supporting both the US Open Cup and local teams, come out and join us this weekend at the Logan Memorial Education Campus at 4:30 on Sunday for that match again from FC Balboa against SD Inter. All right, Dylan, any thoughts about the match before we get into our main topic here tonight?
No, I'm just excited to watch some live soccer. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I agree with you, especially for me because I haven't been out to see any soccer. I think maybe this calendar year I haven't been out to see any soccer. So it'll be nice to get out there and see what's going on. Support some local soccer.
Yeah, like super local, not like local because they play here, but all the money's going somewhere else local.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So again, hopefully see everybody else out there. But let's go ahead and get into our main topic tonight, which is diving into part 3 of our San Diego soccer history. So we started this a while back. Dylan and I were both talking, and we thought we'd do some stuff looking originally at starting back with the Toros, the San Diego Toros from the NASL. And once I started looking, I went back, looked at newspaper clippings because I have an account, and did some research way back towards the turn of the century, and was surprised to actually find stuff about soccer in the newspapers, and some soccer teams. So started doing some research, and eventually we're probably going to put some of these together into some soccer shorts episodes. So right now we've just been doing some I'll call it surface research, really just focusing on the soccer. But to understand the stories, we're still going to need to do some bigger research to be able to put some of these episodes together. But where we left off after part 2, we were around, I think it was the 1912-1913 season, and there were 3 big adult men's teams in San Diego. And when I say this, like, this is the teams that were being talked about in the paper. Hard to know right now from what I've been able to research, were there anything else on a smaller scale happening in and around the county. But these were teams that were talked about in the newspaper. And there wasn't a league at that time. It was really just these 3 teams. They would play each other, and they would play the British naval vessels that would come into port, because they usually had teams, and when they went into port, they'd like to arrange games to play, either cricket or soccer or both. So you would have these British gunboats that would come in and play, and then you had these other teams. And the 3 big teams were the San Diego Soccer Football Club. Then you had a group called the Nomads, which I believe was affiliated with people from what was called the British Society, and a team that was referred to as Fosters. And that was a team that was from Foster, which is a town that doesn't exist in San Diego County anymore. It's a little bit north of Lakeside. And it was where they had a lot of granite quarries and mining stuff out there. And there was a strong Scottish community that worked out in those mines. So you had this Scottish more centered team, which was the Foster team, which was out there a little bit north of Lakeside, who would take the train in, right? And then you had the more downtown San Diego Soccer Football Club, and then you had the Nomads, which, again, to the best I can tell from the research we've done, seem to be more British expats, although hard to know how many of the players on the other teams were also some British expats as well. So those were the 3 dominant teams, and they kind of played out a bit of a mini season. Really, they're just some ties against each other. And the San Diego Soccer Football Club was eventually declared the champion, and then they went up to LA. They invited the LA team down to come play them. They wanted to invite the LA champions, which they did. The LA champions at the time were the LA Rangers. Rangers comes from Glasgow Rangers, because former players from Glasgow Rangers were actually living and working in LA and formed a soccer team. So this team came down to play the San Diego champions and whooped San Diego 6-1. And that's kind of where we left it at the end of the last episode on part 2. And really, soccer and the excitement around soccer and the crowds was really kind of building. Even though the San Diego team got stomped by this LA team, everybody recognized this LA team had professional soccer players, former professional soccer players in it. In fact, I think one of the players was still getting occasional calls to the Scottish national team. So they had a strong team. I think they had, if I remember correctly, this LA Rangers team had won the LA League up there, which I think was started around 1902, but they had won it like 3 years straight. So they were the dominant Southern California team at the time. But people in San Diego were super excited. And as we pick up part 3, as soon as that match happens, that whole rest of the year, like that is probably the most I've seen from news clippings and stuff and searching through the newspaper archive of mentions of soccer was the rest of 1913. You had a businessman, his name was Frank, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm going to guess Kiessig. It's Kiessig. And he offered to commission and pay for a trophy to be awarded to the winner. They're going to try to find at least one more team to make a minimum of a 4-team league. And they had a couple of groups they were talking to. And just nonstop monthly, I mean, many times a month, there's articles in the newspaper about meetings being held at the Cabrillo Club or some other place to get people together and where they're going to practice. And as you get into September, there's talk about forming teams. And one of the key figures for the San Diego Soccer Football Club is a gentleman by the name of Jack Lamb. I don't know much about him other than his name. That's one of the things I'd like to do some deeper investigation. But he's really the face of the San Diego Soccer Football Club, because they refer to it in the newspaper a lot of time as Lamb's Men or Lamb's Boys when they play. Because I think it's also, when you think about newspapers and typesetting at the time, probably a lot easier to put that in than San Diego Soccer Football Club. So you get Lamb's Boys are referred to a lot, and then they would take on, the Nomads. But as we start getting into the fall and they're prepping to get ready for the league and they're looking at when these British gunships are coming in and when they can organize some of those games, the Foster's team is non-existent anymore in the conversations. And we had mentioned at the end of part 2 that the Foster's team lost a bunch of their Scottish players right towards the end of that season of 1912 to 1913. Don't know why exactly or what happened. That's another thing I want to dig a little deeper into. But they had left. They got some new players in. It looked like they're going to have a team, but don't know what happened, because they were really the strong team of the 3. But as that team started to fall apart in 1912, 1913, that's when the San Diego Soccer Football Club kind of surpassed them in terms of wins on the field, because I think Foster's lost some of their key Scottish players. Don't know if they just work dried up and they went somewhere else or had a better offer or what happened, but they seem to lose quite a few of their key players that they had. So September rolls around. They're Jessup's Jewelers that are still around here in San Diego. They also offer up trophies and medals. And they look like, they might get a group called the Sons of St. George, which is, a fraternal order of British expats, so that they might get a team together. And then there's a new group that comes onto the scene, the Coronado 11, but they've got a team that's playing in Coronado, so they might join in with this. But eventually, nothing happens. There's no league. It's just the 3 teams. And even though the San Diego Soccer Football Club, as we go into the 13-14 season, is really dominant, the Nomads team seems to be missing a couple of their players early, and then over the course of their series of test matches, the Nomads prevail and they end up becoming the champions, and then they get the ones to go represent and play LA. And San Diego goes up to LA this time and also loses. I forget which team they played. But in all this momentum that seemed to be building around this 13-14 season, and a lot of the changes that are happening in and around San Diego's getting ready for the Panama-California Exposition, which is, they just renamed Balboa Park. They're building all this. There's a lot of excitement coming up around that. And again, I don't know exactly what happens, but even though they award medals, and there's a picture in the newspaper of the Nomads group with their medals, shortly after this, as we get into what ought to be the 14-15 season, soccer just seems to disappear in terms of the discourse in the newspapers. So again, short of finding other sources, hard to know what really happened. There's some speculations we could make, but on all the excitement that had been building up to this point, it seems to almost just disappear. There are a couple of stories in there where it seemed like even though all these soccer groups seem to be very friendly with each other, sometimes share players when needed, they would practice together. There also did seem to be a couple of news articles that indicate a falling out between the Nomads and the San Diego Soccer Football Club. So that's, again, something I want to investigate a little further. But interesting that San Diego was just on the cusp of getting a league going, and they wanted basically, it's funny reading some of the articles because, man, we just got our asses handed to us by LA. We want to challenge them better next time. We need to get a league going. We need to prepare our players better. We need to have more teams and more players. And then it just kind of falls apart. So before we kind of talk about then what happens from there, Dylan, do you have any comments or want to jump in?
I mean, not too much. I don't have access to the newspaper clippings, so a lot of this is new to me. I've tried to kind of look some stuff up as you've gone, and I found absolutely no information about San Diego Soccer Football Club.
It's hard, yeah.
Yeah, so I this is all information I don't even know that I'd have been able to find without signing up for that newspaper subscription, which is unfortunate.
Right. And unfortunately for me, through my account that I have, I don't have access to the San Diego Union. I don't even know if the Tribune was part of the news scene at this time, which for anybody maybe outside of here, it's now the San Diego Union Tribune, just a single newspaper. So this is mostly the San Diego Sun, which I think existed till about the 40s. So it has been good, but I will later go in and dig through the UT archives. I may have to go to one of our libraries and see what I can find to supplement what I found through the San Diego Sun. But it's interesting, just seeing what's going on in San Diego at the time as you go through this, because if you look at the sports, it's, again, funny to see, how different it is, how sports are talked about today and how they were spoken about back then. It was very much a social activity, as we're talking here in the 19 teens, the early 19 teens. There'd be articles in the newspaper, if you wanted your soccer team to meet, you put a little story in the newspaper. You talk to a reporter and say, hey, and have all these clippings that says soccer team meets tonight, and they'll give all the description, that Jack Lamb is calling a meeting at the Caprio Club. All soccer players should be there if they want to play, kind of thing. And that was the communication through the paper. So in that sense, it's nice because you get an indication of what was going on. And it also seems like a lot of these people who were involved with soccer ran businesses and were also involved in some other ways. There certainly seemed to be a lot of people with very recent immigrant backgrounds that are a part of the soccer scene, and which I don't think is surprising at all. And it's, when you look at the other sports, boxing is huge, cycling is huge, motorcycle racing is huge, bowling is huge. There's all this stuff, but baseball is by far in our area, in terms of coverage, like the dominant sport. All the small regional leagues that were happening, all the things that's going on in the schools, really dominate the sports pages at the time. So, like this was first and foremost a baseball town. Then American football, but basketball, volleyball, bowling, cycling, cricket, soccer, all those things were all underneath almost equally. They were there, and a lot of stories, especially around this time, because the new U.S. Soccer Federation's being formed around this time, 1913, and then the National Challenge Cup, which we know as the Open Cup, in 1914. So, this stuff is making the news, and also it helped on the West Coast. I think what helped not have American football explode like it might have otherwise is the fact, and I think we mentioned this on our very first, on part one, is Stanford and Cal, two of our bigger sports schools and universities in the state, elected to go away from American football because it was too dangerous. And they instead took up rugby and soccer. Rugby was the big sport. And then soccer was really kind of the off-season sport to keep people in shape. But because they were being played at big universities within California, that really helped keep soccer alive during this time. And again, San Diego's a little different, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, as compared to LA or San Francisco, which had very strong ethnic populations that were very regionalized in certain areas. So if they brought the game with them, that helped keep the game going. A little bit different than San Diego, because San Diego appears, from everything I've seen, to be a highly transient region for much of its early history. And that only became a bigger deal with all the military involvement. So even though things seem to die down in what could potentially be the start of adult soccer leagues, regional leagues in San Diego, soccer didn't go away. It was still in the newspaper, but it was in terms of the military. And a lot of it had to do with Camp Kearney opening up in 1917. So Camp Kearney, along with a bunch of other camps across the U.S., were these camps that were built like within months to train and get troops ready to go fight in World War I. So in the area that we now refer to as Kearney Mesa is where Camp Kearney was. But Camp Kearney, as part of their conditioning and training and socialization for all their troops and families, is they built a tremendous amount of athletic fields, a whole bunch of baseball fields, again, more baseball fields than anything else. But then they built a couple of American football fields, and they built several soccer fields. And when they polled, I saw an article where they did a poll of troops that were at Camp Kearney and what did they want to play, and soccer was the second most popular sport. So there still was a lot of soccer being played, but then all the news reports shift very quickly to, I'm making up numbers here because I don't know what they are, remember, but like the 127th Regiment against, the 83rd Battalion. And, just they'd have these different groups and teams that would play each other. And their leagues were not, they were organized, but I would say it was probably a little more like intramurals that people would still come and watch because it was a social thing to do. And it was covered by the newspaper, but because you had troops and people getting trained and shipping out frequently, that rosters would change or teams would change, or this team couldn't play anymore because they're gone, and now you have a new team that comes in and plays. But that's really where the soccer kind of continued. And then Camp Kearney wasn't around for very long. It was from 1917 to 1920 before it eventually morphed into some other things with the military. But we really, like that kind of signaled, at least through the newspapers, kind of an end of soccer being talked about in the newspapers outside of what's happening in a school setting, or you search a keyword soccer and you find like someone selling equipment like footballs and baseballs and soccer balls. So the equipment was being sold. People were clearly still playing in at least the school level. Again, I have no idea if, I'm sure there weren't youth leagues like we think of youth leagues, but people must have still been playing. It's just really hard to know how they were playing if it's not, reported anywhere and if it's not covered in the newspaper. But certainly by 1920, that's it. Like there isn't really any mention of soccer, of anything significantly happening. In fact, I've even already started doing some research ahead, and it looks like there's really nothing till almost about 1926. So we had a lot of things happen in San Diego during that time, which I'm sure contributed in some way. We got the Panama-California Exposition that happened in 15 and 16. We have horrible floods, like some of the worst flooding we've ever had in the county in January of 1916. I think at the time there were 100 and some bridges in San Diego and only 2 survived. It wasn't a horrible amount of rain in terms of total inches, but it had already been raining, and then a big rain came, and we don't have or didn't have the reservoir system and structure, flood control structure that we have now. So all the stuff that came down from the mountain just washed things out. San Diego was effectively cut off from the rest of the world for like a month or something. Luckily, there was some wireless telegraph that still could be done, and they were able to bring some emergency supplies in through steamship. But it was a devastating economic impact there in 1916 as well. And really, I'm not sure that was the key thing, but also the economy was a little depressed and really didn't pick up again until the opening of Camp Kearney. But that happens, you bring in jobs, the Spanish flu hits in 1918. Prohibition comes into effect in 1919, which is, one of, I think, really helped solidify the San Diego TJ, the crossover there at the border, even though we just fairly recently finished the Mexican-American War. You could go drink down in TJ, right? And you people could be in San Diego, you could go across the border, and then you could come back. So that was certainly a big thing that one of the things that helped tie our border communities together for, I don't know if it was always a positive thing at that time, but certainly that idea of crossing over the border and coming back really changed around 1919 and built up kind of the scene there in TJ. And those were some of the big things that happened around that area that, had to have an impact on what was going on everywhere. So if you were a nascent sport like soccer trying to get a foothold and you were struggling a little bit, probably made it extra difficult in all those times to really get something going and get people to come and watch. And baseball was also affected during this time, but it had such a strong foothold in what was happening in and around San Diego that it continued without too much trouble. And that's kind of at least where we are with this episode. Like we had the so close to getting a league going and teams that wanted to participate and work together with the Southern California Football League and build a bigger structure throughout Southern California. And then it just kind of disappeared for reasons that not 100% clear just yet.
Bummer.
Yeah, it could have been pretty interesting if that had moved forward. And unfortunately, I haven't finished doing the research yet, but knowing our history, it'll be interesting to see. I imagine there's a pickup in the 1920s. And then once we hit the Depression, World War II, and we come back from World War II, and we get into McCarthyism and some of those things, and this idea of, you know, showing that you're an American.
I
Yeah,
have to say,
that's
it's funny that you say that because when I was young, and I would have been maybe like a freshman in high school, we learned about the McCarthy era of U.S. politics, and like the first thing I thought of was soccer. Like I definitely grew up in a world that was still dealing with the residual aftermath of McCarthyism on soccer in the United States. Like I know that seems like a dramatically specific thing to say, but as somebody who started to get into soccer in high school, like there was that kind of like latent anti-American aspect that people assumed
yes.
about it. Yeah.
I mean, that didn't really, I mean, that's really only been in the last 10 to 15 years that has
Yeah.
mostly cleared up.
And even still, some people, depending on where you are.
Yeah. I mean, you had, who is it? I think I want to say Frank DeFord, maybe, but wrote scathing stuff about soccer. You had Fox News hosts who wrote, un-American, poison your kids, like just, with ideas and say it's not American. Your kid should be playing American sports. I mean, this is not an uncommon theme in the U.S., right? We're seeing it now. You like to have it. I mean, it's just human behavior. It's not just the U.S., but you like to have scapegoats. Be able to point to some people that you can blame. And we're a country of immigrants. So on the one hand, those groups that came to communities and tried to retain some of their culture and live near and around people who shared some of that same culture, we're able to still, in these, we usually refer to them as ethnic communities, but that's where soccer tended in a lot of places to stay strong in those areas. But you also have, and equally the same, you had people who came over as immigrants, maybe first generation, or came over as an immigrant, but they tried to completely assimilate as much as possible. And I think we have to be fair to say by assimilate means be as Anglo as possible. Change your name so it doesn't sound foreign, try to lose your accent if possible. But, and we have things, and this, I think they highlighted it very well. There's a recent podcast series called An American Game. If you haven't heard it, I strongly recommend it, where they also look into just general U.S. soccer history. But they have some good anecdotes that they point out of this idea of people pulling up the ladder behind them. I came in as an immigrant, but I really tried to Anglofy myself, be more American. And then kind of pull up the ladder behind them and point the finger and lay blame at the new immigrants that are coming in, right? And again, we see the exact same behaviors today in our society. But that's kind of been a history a lot in our country. And, I'm sure we're going to get to that point also with San Diego, where soccer was really, really discouraged, or maybe not soccer directly discouraged, but you were certainly encouraged to play the American sports, baseball, football, basketball, volleyball, right? Not play these sports from the rest of the world. You need to show and display that you're an American.
Good thing we don't do that anymore, right?
Yeah. It's a good thing we're open and inclusive and welcoming. All right.
Anyway,
it's been fun doing this research. I think there's some really cool stories about, I'm looking down at the names here on my notes of some of these people, like Jack Lamb and Wallace Wakefield, who seem to be the leader for the Nomads, and this Frank Keisig and Jessup Jewelers and their involvement. And I really, and the people from the Coronado 11, I really hope I can find some more stories or some deeper insight to some of these people to help tell a more robust story of some of these early soccer people and pioneers in San Diego, and then how what they did had an effect later. Because even looking through the 20s, when it gets to 1926, all of a sudden there's someone who's like, hey, puts something out in the paper, like we're getting people together again. We want to start getting soccer going again in San Diego. It's been too long. Like basically we used to have a strong soccer scene, and we want to get that back going again. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. And, before we get to, I think what most people think of as the start of soccer in San Diego would be the San Diego Toros in '68.
Fair enough.
And then we'll build that out, and then we'll build up from there.
Sounds good.
All right. I think that, unless you have any other comments about this, Dylan, I think that about wraps up what we're doing for part 3 of San Diego soccer history. Before we completely wrap things up, Dylan, what are your plans? Besides, we're getting together on Sunday to watch round 2 of U.S. Open Cup qualifying. So Sunday, 4:30 p.m. at the Logan Memorial Education campus. But other than that, got
That's
any
actually
soccer
really
plans
it.
for the week?
Well timed. It's an international break, which I'm not a fan of. So that's, I believe, my only plan on the docket. Waiver away.
That's going to be my big outing. So I'm looking forward to getting out to do that. And I'm sure I'll catch some matches here and there throughout the week, but I don't have anything on my calendar other than the U.S. Open Cup qualifying.
Sweet. Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, for everyone else, hope you enjoyed the episode and diving into a little bit of San Diego soccer history. If you have a question or comment about tonight's episode, or you want to give us suggestions about things to cover in future episodes, especially in relation to San Diego soccer history, please drop us a note. You can leave a comment here on our YouTube channel. You can send us a message over at Blue Sky or at soccershorts@bigpinedigital.com. Or if you're listening on your podcast app, you can send us a text using the send us a text link at the top of the episode description. And before I forget, if you can join us live on Tuesdays, we usually go at 6 p.m. Pacific time. Come on over and find us on our YouTube channel and join us in the chat. All right, Dylan, before we wrap up the show, do you have any final comments?
No, it's always interesting to kind of learn about the way that San Diego, I think a lot of people don't think about it this way anymore, but like really was a very transient military town. And it's kind of interesting to see how that kind of history has influenced the way that soccer has kind of taken root here, or hasn't really, I guess, in this case.
And, as they refer to it in the newspaper all the time, our neighbors to the north,
Yes.
LA, there was, this is totally separate, but there was there was a time where it was going to be San Diego or LA that became the big city of Southern California. And LA was the one that won out for a variety of reasons. But that also helped overshadow a lot of the things in San Diego in terms of development of sport, because you had more people going to LA. But also it really helped make us who we are because of that military thing that you referred to. We were left with a bit more open land. Plus we have a great harbor in terms of, being a military port. So it really left us open to be that big military town in Southern California. So I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more on future episodes.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of Local Grassroots Stories, and we will see you next week. Good night.